open. Fractalization, polyopia, closed, breath. No burning, eyes open. Kaleidoscopic noise, eyes shut. Another breath, eyes open. Triplopia now. 3 posters for a vampire movie called Texas Teeth. 3 open closets in disarray. Music through walls. Eyes closed. My thoughts are bees on the blue lotus of my divine mother's feet, sang for Algernon. Are we lying down? No. The world is an empty sky, sang for Algernon. I am lying down. The lotus does not adhere to water, sang for Algernon, his mother's favorite album. Eyes open, double vision, 2 ceiling fans on low, 2 bookshelves, comic books stacked on top, 2 photos of himself with Espie and Ezra, 2 mirrors reflecting 2 closets in disarray, eyes closed. This is my room, he told himself. I'm in my own bed. He rolled over, pulled the blankets to his chin. For Algernon sang, Our minds, surpassing that in purity. Bacon. He could smell bacon. In the kitchen, something dropped. Quat! Callie cursed. For Algernon sang, We bow in veneration to thee, most exalted one. Mom? He said. It took several moments for him to gather the strength, but finally he managed the wherewithal to call out, Mom! Callie came into the room not 4 seconds later. Good morning, Arcus, she said, sitting next to him on his bed. My love, my boy, she added, stroking his hair before kissing his forehead. How do you feel? Thirsty, he said. She handed him the glass of water from his nightstand. He took a slow, long drink, breathed and said, I'm really sore, but Wait, what are all these bandages? He asked, noticing the red and brown stained white wraps encircling his wrists and traveling up his arms. His heart skipped a beat. Brace yourself. She put a gentle hand on his chest. You were pretty badly burned, Scott. You don't remember the hospital? Hospital? Now his heart was in his stomach. Don't worry, Callie comforted. Your healing has been superhuman, and your superhero secret is safe. You were in the hospital over in the ID for 3 days, but your cop friends checked you into the ER under an alias. Strange guys. Anyway, the doctors were amazed by your recovery. They'd never seen anything like it. I'm sure they put 2 and 2 together by the 3rd morning when your eye wasn't fused shut anymore. But who knows? The hospital was overwhelmed. There were so many victims. The halls were clogged with gurneys. He blinked, felt his eye, got out of bed while stripping his bandages, and looked in the mirror over the dresser. Hey, wait! Instant relief. My eye was fused shut. He looked perfectly fine besides the crusties at the corners of his eyes. No burns on his hands, arms, chest, or neck. The bandages on the floor were stained with the evidence of probable outcome in a probable timeline with probability of being his own. Maybe he had altered the probability. Math, he heard himself say in his mind's theater. Math is my power? He smiled ear to ear. It was awful. She cocked her head, amused at her son's amusement. I thought I was going to lose you, Scott. Watching you heal has been incredible, though. You still have seeping wounds when I changed your bandages last night. As he climbed back under the covers, Callie helped, asking, You don't remember coming home, either? He shook his head. Nothing after my night with Berserker. I saw some footage of that, Callie said. You punched the monster off over the island and into the ocean. Pretty impressive. His right eye twitched. For 2 years he had managed to hide his double life as Skyrat from her. Sometimes it was harder than fighting the bad guys. Mr. and Mrs. Bird have cut me up to speed, but you and I have a lot to talk about, don't we? It wasn't a question. Yeah, he sighed. The fire, did I... His voice cracked. Did I save those families, Mum? You saved so many people, Scott. So many. She took his hand. I am so proud of you. He closed his eyes and began crying. She held his hand tight, watching his chest heave, no longer regretting their journey to the lost encampment, the choices she had made to get him here to this moment. It's okay, Scott. Let it out. She had wanted her son to be some kind of man who, when faced with the suffering of others, did something about it, and here he was. For Algernon sang. When the moment had passed into the next, she asked, Can you eat? Yeah, he said, wiping his eyes. I'm sorry, He was starving. Do I smell breakfast? I'll get you some. Callie got up, adjusted her son's blankets and pillows, kissed his forehead once more, and headed for the kitchen. Scott stopped her at the door. Mom? She turned. Yes, son? What's the deal with you and Louie Louie? The words were right on the tip of his tongue. He hesitated. I love you, he said. I love you too. Louie Louie's yacht, the Sekhmet, was anchored within the Bliss Barges cluster southeast of the Green City Island. The barges comprised this Earth's only Bliss manufacturing operation, and it was no secret, but it didn't have to be. Too many people at all levels within and without Green City's walls profited from it. For Tony Poseidon, acquiring Bliss had been a matter of shady interstellar trade. Louisa Tagyara, however, procured local connections with expendable cash and devoutly shared philosophy. Scientists and doctors with specialized education worked together in hyper-clean laboratories within the bellies of the Bliss barges to manufacture the nanomechanical drug Bliss. The sensitive laboratories were stabilized by an alien technology that kept them as still as a brought monk's mind, despite the weather and waves outside. Blatantly parked in between the city's port of entry and the customs immigration complex on the mainland, it would be a violation of the Bird Treaty for Geronimo to get anywhere close. With the attack on the Forest Glen projects, however, all bets were off. The treaty would no longer be the shield it had been. Armed guards, not Louie's, but professionals, stalked the perimeter of each barge. It was a professional on the back deck of the yacht with Louie Louie. He sat opposite her deck lounger at a table under an umbrella, his body language suggesting boredom. He was overdressed in his yellow-trimmed blue wool blazer, gloves, jeans, cowboy boots, and hat. His mask had a tight-fitting blue cowl under the back of his head, and the neck as well was a simple but stylized gold faceplate with angular horns that peeked above his eyes on his forehead, just under the brim of his hat. There was no mouth, and it was expressionless. Battle and poor care had dulled and dented its once sleek splendor. It was the same for the whole of his being. Everything he wore had holes in it and was dirty enough to suggest he owned nothing else. His katana was placed across the table from him, but his sidearm was holstered at his right thigh. Feynman stepped out onto the deck from the cabin behind Louie Louie and served the sunbathing gangster a mojito with a lime wedge, keeping an anxious eye on the masked mercenary who had been introduced to her as the Unknown. He made her nervous because, oh, my goodness, that voice. Her boss was laying out in a black bikini and sunglasses, a biography of the rock star Daniel Dooley on her belly. An old Meat Curtain album was playing on the Sekhmet stereo, the volume low. For Feynman, the slow and heavy proto-metal of the early work gave the scene a sinister vibe that put her on edge. "Thank you, Feynman," Louie Louie said, accepting the drink. On the deck to her right was a Bliss applicator. "You okay with this guy?" Fenman whispered. Her boss threw a mischievous grin, then took a sip from her straw. Louder, Fenman said, "If it's okay with you, Lou." She cast another nervous glance at the unknown, then back to Louie Louie said, "I need to get back to help my mom with her new place." "Last chance for a drink before we lose our bartender," Louie Louie informed her guest. The unknown gave no response. He continued to admire the view of the barge parked next door to the yacht, taking note of the changing of the guard going down on the upper deck. The barge's deck was 20 feet higher than that of the yacht, and its expanse dwarfed Louie Louie's boat. The deck was fenced off with ornate, antique wrought iron, and the windowed bridge occupied 3/4 of the center area, offset towards the back on a raised platform, with wrought iron steps leading to entrances on either side. A series of complex antennae, satellite dishes, metal boxes, tubes, and cylinders rose from the bridge's roof. All of the bliss barges were the same, and the yacht was surrounded by them. Louie Louie took another sip through the straw and waved Feynman off. "Take your mother a carton of cigarettes," she said, "and tell her if she needs anything else, more money, a ride, someone to play cards with. You make sure she doesn't hesitate to call me." "Thanks, Louie Louie," she said, then wasted no time, making a hurried beeline back into the cabin door, behind to the left of her boss. At each corner of the cabin was an ancient statue of the seated goddess Sekhmet, her head that of a fierce lioness. Louie Louie said, "Mission report." The unknown continued to watch the guards on the barge. There were 2 black uniformed men on deck with their sleeves rolled up, gloved hands holding custom Q-30 blast rifles. Sidearms were holstered at their hips, and they wore combat knives on their right boots. They were going their separate ways after a briefing. "A success." His voice was low and raspy, an unnatural reverb to it. "Your intelligence was correct. The outpost." Pauses between sentences were punctuated with painful-sounding gulping noises. "Was a stop along a human trafficking route. 40 or so prisoners, all destined for sale in Green City, were held in the basement, most under 20, some as young as 12, all malnourished. 5 special agents of the left hand manned the base. I killed them and turned the building over to the prisoners. Evolution has been contacted to dispatch a medevac team." "Excellent work," Louie Louie said. "I'll call my lady there and expedite it." She took a large gulp from a mojito, ignoring the straw. "I see you've traded up. You're wearing the mask of bloodlust." Unknown turned his head and met Louie Louie's eyes with his own, covered by the wide lenses of his faceplate. "As well as his jacket and sword," he informed her. "I came upon him as he was torturing pilgrims in the evil East, with the intent to harvest their kidneys, hearts, and livers. After he had his fun, I beat him to death with a rock." She coughed politely into her elbow. "I appreciate your violent brand of altruism, Unknown. Just like you, I want to help people, and I know that in this environment one must be brutal in their expression of compassion for their fellow human beings. You are human, right?" "Close enough," he said. Feynman could be heard speeding off in a hover car. "The point?" "The point," Louie Louie said, "is that your next mission will be to recruit Skyrat. For a minute there, I'd prefer to be served his masked head with my grapefruit and toast for breakfast, but I've developed a soft spot for the boy. Geronimo murdered my children and their families in their homes." Her voice cracked, but she composed herself immediately. "But it would have been much worse without the rat and these doppelgangers there." "More than one, act as Skyrat? She sat forward, knocking her book aside and putting her drink down on the deck on her right by the bliss applicator. That's the thing. I saw them. What's the word? She took her sunglasses off, revealing her eye of raw makeup, a callback to her family's origins. Reassemble? Amalgamate? I saw it with my own eyes, and I still hardly believe it. Skyrat can divide himself like a cell. She relaxed back into her lounge chair again, returning her sunglasses to her face. He was there with a couple of cups and his girlfriend. When he was one again, he was burned to a crisp, smoldering, couldn't walk on his own. His jacket looked like it had been melted onto his chest. He was crying for his mother. Embarrassing. She finished her mojito. After all the stories I have heard from my children, the sick what they said, the Skyrat has survived. I don't expect we've heard the last from him. Find out who he is, put a slow squeeze on him, cut off his oxygen, turn him against those cops, teach him the pain of working with anyone in Green City but Louie Louie. Show him he has no option but to come to me. I want to give him a job, pay him for his troubles. Take advantage of his abilities. The unknown finished for her as he stood up. He retrieved his sword, removed his hat, and then slung the weapon across his back, before returning his worn-out war bonnet to his head. A large hole on the top of the masked cowl was exposed, revealing the tangled scarring on his bald head beneath. It will take time. Have fun with it. He strode as if to pass her without acknowledgement, but stopped just beyond her eyesight. He offered a color. When the many are reduced to one, what is the one reduced to? Don't forget that one beat the ever-loving Quat out of Berserker. The cone reminded her of the solo EP Daniel Dooley recorded after Meat Curtain broke up. What was it called? Friend Like Fire? How apropos. She retrieved her book from the deck and began looking for her page. Get out of here, you cupid Quat. You stink. With a single sick note that resembled a chuckle, he did as he was told, leaving through the cabin door. Louie Louie dropped her book beside her and picked up the bliss applicator, then primed the device before sighing and tossing it aside, breaking it. Bad idea, she thought. She pulled her knees up toward the sky and put her hands on her thighs. Her left rested on her only tattoo, a geisha brandishing a bloody samurai sword in the style of a traditional Japanese watercolor. Today would be the last day of her retreat. Tomorrow she would be resolved to begin a new phase of leadership. No more playing things fast and loose. It was time to organize, to militarize, to plan. Geronimo had once again attacked her and her family, and had once again taken those she loved. Now she would declare war. Movement up the barge on her right caught her attention. It was the unknown, running along the inside of the wrought iron fencing towards a lone guard with his back turned. Unknown's sword was out and orange hot along the razor's edge. The mercenary stopped short of the man in black, saying, "Hey." The guard turned, and Unknown's sword flashed, severing his arm at the forearm side of his right elbow. The gloved hand, which was holding on to his custom Q-30, took to the air. Unknown kicked the guard in the face, launching him off his feet, and then caught the forearm before the guard's back hit the deck. The rifle fell from the limp hand, and Unknown kicked it off under the wrought iron and off the side of the barge. It happened so fast, Louie Louie hadn't time enough to process the scene, let alone call out. She unholstered her rotoplasma cannon from under her lounger, jumped up and yelled out, "What the quat was that?" The Unknown tossed the severed arm across the chasm between the boats, and it landed in front of Louie Louie, glove palmed up as he had intended. There was no blood, only a charred black stump. The logo of the left hand was tattooed on the forearm. She put her left fist on her hip, Her hand cannon in her right hand was pointed down at the deck, and her trigger finger was running circles around the trigger guard. She glared daggers at the severed limb. How could such an obvious detail have slipped past her team? "Quartus!" she said, kicking it under the guardrails and off into the ocean. The unknown disarmed the unconscious man, hog-tied his remaining hand to his feet, then leapt from the barge to the yacht. The crime boss was distracted, ruminating on the severed limb. Unknown landed from his jump in front of her, and she reflexively raised her weapon and fired. His reflex was faster, and he rotated his body just as the plasma bolt passed him by. He sheathed his now cold sword and fixed his jacket. "That guard is a left-handed assassin. He may not be alone. I will stay with you. For now." "Interrogate him." "No, wait." She lowered her weapon, turned around, walked to the cabin door, and pushed a button on the control panel. "Yes, Louie Louie," a gruff voice said through the intercom. The music had shut off. "Send me the captain of the barge guard. In the meantime, I need Detective Patel on the line. Now, Erabamgi, post-haste. Code red." "Yes, Louie Louie." The music began again, the drumming tribal, the guitar amplifiers feeding back. The crime boss returned to her deck lounger and hoisted her weapon underneath. She retrieved her fallen book, then tried unsuccessfully to take another drink of mojito. She put the glass of ice and mint leaves back down and shoved it hard, like a puck, across the deck and off the guardrail into the sea. "Cheers, Lefty." The unknown watched her silently with his arms crossed. "I love it when you are in town," she said. Matt and Rob stepped down from the cab of the rented moving truck outside of Matt's new place in the Res D, each of them flicking away their twin breezy's butts. Matt had been driving. They were both hungover after having tied one on at the bar the night before and exhausted from carrying boxes all morning. Bog's new digs were a couple of blocks east of Center Park on a tree-lined street. Parking was nearly impossible. They had circled the block 6 times before finally finding a large enough space opened, a block and a half away from the 3-story walk-up. It was early Sunday afternoon, so there was no traffic to speak of. Kids were playing soccer in the street. Behind the moving truck, Rob opened the gate, revealing the last bunch of boxes inside. Too much for the last haul from storage. Too little to fill the van's floor space. He took off his jacket, revealing his navy blue West Coast Police Academy t-shirt underneath, and tossed it into the back of the truck. He said, "I knew we wouldn't be getting as lucky as we did this morning." Matt took his own jacket off and tossed it next to Rob's, and saying, "Please, complain about the parking some more. You haven't said enough about it, and I just love it, dude. Can't get enough of it. It fuels me, your whining." He was wearing a new yellow Tony's Corner Office Pub t-shirt. It had been a much different experience than usual there last night. Matt wondered who had ownership and how they had kept it going so seamlessly after Poseidon's disappearance. He had worn his detective's glasses all evening and saw nothing suspicious. Devoid of the usual suspects, it was a banal place. No Tony Triad bouncers or busboys. Tony Poseidon wasn't freaking out in the kitchen because of some tiny mistake the assistant chef had made. No shady characters at the bar waiting for an audience with the big man. "All the fun and personality's been drained out of the place," Rob had said while peeing next to the dumpster behind the pub. In the hallway outside of the new apartment, feeling awful and oblivious to the world around him, Matt put his box down at his feet so he could get the keys from his jean pocket. The boxes for this last load had been taken from the bar the previous evening. They bore the logo of Pirate's Piss, a session IPA from a brew pub on the eastern docks called Pirate's Plank. It was a left-handed joint, but the beer was pretty good, if you liked IPAs. Rob quickly put his own box down, saying, Hold up, dude. Reaching for the little antique revolver holstered under his jeans at his ankle, the door's lock was busted. Quat's sake, man, already? Matt took the gun from his partner. Laser lit up his fists with glowing, swirling orange and yellow liquid light, illuminating the hall around them. Ready? Do it. Matthew kicked the door in, rushing forward, gun pointed, his partner flying in behind him. On the couch, up against the wall, under the window, surrounded by a mess of turned-out and emptied boxes, sat a uniformed cop wearing an orange Sikh turban. His manicured black beard was epic, his posture was perfect. On the couch next to him was a large, armored, robotic cat, modeled after a lynx. It lowered its front end and raised its hindquarters, preparing to pounce, its tail slowly wagging in the air with flashing red and blue lights on its tip. The cat hissed, showing its teeth, and its eyes fired high-beam headlights at the DOP partners. Matt shielded his eyes, saying, "Breaking and entering is a crime I can shoot you for, Samir." "Do it," said Rob, landing next to his partner, shutting off his powers. "Burglary is also shootable, I think." With a wave of a hand in front of his robots, the high beams shut off, otherwise the cat remained in position, tail going like a casual metronome, police lights flashing. "Haven't taken a thing, codename Laser," Detective Patel said in his dignified Indian baritone. Rob and Matt shared a look. If he knew about the codenames, their cover had been blown. They'd known it wouldn't take long. "Only helps your partner, Miss Matthew, here. Unpack a bit." Rob squeezed his partner's shoulder as the hammer of the revolver in Matthew's hand was pulled back. "Don't let this quarto provoke you," said Rob. The intruder smiled. "Copcat's reporting of the murder would be enough to convict you, assuming you survived her retaliation. She wouldn't be gentle, I assure you." She continued to wag her tail next to Detective Patel, ready to pounce. Matt lowered the gun, disarmed it, and gave it back to his partner. "Say your piece and get out. We got work to do." "I see. You know, this classy building in this charming neighborhood would lead one to believe that this would be more than the glorified efficiency that it is. You should have the property manager paint and clean the carpet before you move in. A cap's salary doesn't go so far when you don't take side work from Louie Louie." Patel smiled. "Your little raid was quite impressive. You got your warrant and kept it secret from my contemporaries and I. Bravo! That deserves particular accommodation. However, I know exactly how much bliss was confiscated by your team, so I know exactly how much of it is not in the evidence locker. I imagine the rest of the bliss you confiscated is on the moving truck, yes? You saved your most precious possessions to move last, didn't you, Codename Bog? Or did you just shoot it all, you junkie?" "Not even a $1 points," Rob spat. Detective Patel stood, and Copcat hopped down to the carpet next to him, purring at his boots, shutting down the taillights. "Skyrat's attack on Louie Louie's spawn happened simultaneously with your raid. No coincidence. There's footage of the two of you working with Skyrat after the Forest Glen attack. Turn them over to me now, and I'll neglect to charge you as his accomplices." "Accomplices to what?" Patel walked past them towards the door, saying, "I just hate to see you end your careers in such pathetic fashion after your embarrassment back in interdimensional crimes. Skyrat is not worth it, I assure you." Outside the door in the hall, he knelt, petting his mammoth feline robot as she purred past him. "Tell me his name." "He's some rich kid," Rob blurted out before his partner could even think. "Lives with his dad in one of those swanky armored condos built right in the West Side Wall. Family's got more money than you've ever seen, Patel. Connections in government, too. Skyrat's bulletproof in more ways than one." Standing, Patel said, "All that money, And he's running around in a mask made from a t-shirt sleeve? No, I think not. He's not bulletproof, and he's not safe from us. Good day, officers. After he'd left, they'd brought in the 2 boxes from the hall and set them on the breakfast bar that separated the kitchen from the living room bedroom area. Matt sat back on the left-hand corner of the couch, and Rob got them both a can of piss from the fridge. He popped the top for his friend and passed it to him, saying, "Hair of the dog?" Then opened his own as he flopped into the opposite corner of the couch. "Quite that guy," he told Matt. "Yeah." Matt took a slug of his citrus-flavored IPA. "And his little robot cat, too." He burped and then said, "Thanks for the help, Rob. Honestly, I don't know what I'd do without your support and friendship through all of this. And listen, I'm sorry for going off on your new girlfriend like that last night. I didn't mean to make her leave. I don't know what I was thinking." "You weren't," Rob responded. "Like that quat you pulled with Skyrat when the left-hand attack, and Sandretta is not my girlfriend yet." Pointing to the boxes on the bar, he asked, "That's the last of that quat?" It was the remainder of the bliss they had seized, what Detective Patel had been looking for. Ironic that Quathole was kneeling right beside it out there and didn't even notice. Matt glared. "Look," he said, desperate to change the subject again. I know I said so last night, but, this is me sober. Seeing you were a real hero back there at the fire, it was pretty incredible what you did. I'm proud to be your partner. You did good." "You too, man. That anti-berserker gas you cooked up was something else. That cough, right?" He gave his friend a light punch on the arm. "You're always so sentimental when you're hungover. You gonna be all right?" "Psychic hangover is worse than the piss hangover." Matt regretted admitting it as soon as it escaped his lips. He stood up slowly. "As soon as we get the rest of my quat in here and fix the lock, I'll be fine." He polished off his beer can. "Ready?" "They were the worst kind when I was a kid," sang Robert. Matthew grinned and sang the response, "Wrong side of the map." Codename Laser drained the rest of his own beer and slapped Codename Bog on the back, singing, "Traded with traitors, made war with our neighbors. Wrong side of the map." Together they headed out of the apartment to finish moving, harmonizing. They were the drunk ones. They saved all their shells for weekday vacations so we could raise hell. Meanwhile, in his cruiser around the corner, Detective Samir Patel was putting his seatbelt on. Copcat sat in the passenger seat watching him. As he reached the keys up to the ignition, the robot dropped a bliss applicator into his lap from its mouth, like a tabby coughing up a hairball. "It's used," she purred. "DNA on the needles is a match for Officer Matthew Villarreal, GCPD. Trace remnants of bliss remaining in the applicator bear the serial number of the rated batch." Detective Patel patted Copcat's neck with a satisfied smile. "Good kitty." Like the Brotts in Sunset Park, the Temple of Divine Geometry levitated in still repose, 5 stories above its famous golden ratio garden below. Red, yellow, and blue stained glass windows with fractal patterns radiated from the flickering firelight within the temple's stark, majestic architecture. Immense granite statues of sainted brats as tall as the building itself rose from the structure's base in symbolic pose, circling it from one side of the building's decorative stone staircase to the other, granite steps cascading down from the building's arched entrance to the structure's base posed no utility. Dense, Lush lunar ivy grew from the temple's underside, leaking down several stories, swaying gently in the breeze between the 3 buildings which blocked the temple grounds in. The ivy's countless, enormous, bioluminescent flowers grew from the thick cables of ivy and bathed the garden's spiraling green tendrils of trimmed hedges with a soft blue glow. A dozen or so folks were on contemplative strolls along the garden's path. Off the path, others took shelter from the perpetual gentle rainfall produced by the thick mass of ivy above them, seated on benches under umbrellas at stone tables. In the garden's open grass field, several professional photographers took pictures from tripods, the cameras pointed up to capture the wildlife above. Hundreds of tiff-orbs, attracted by the moisture, darted in and out of the glowing canopy of lunar ivy, playing with each other and feeding on actinomycetes. Several stories beneath the Golden Ratio garden, in the remains of the old Grand City Green Hotel's convention spaces, an auditorium had been converted into a field hospital for the Tonys. They were awake now, some clad in hospital gowns and others in their civvies. No work uniforms to be seen. Most of the men, as well as the handful of women among their ranks, were still in bed, but some were up and about. A few of them stood near Factor and Espie, attempting conversation, speaking in unsure staccato sentences, unsuccessfully attempting to finish one another's thoughts. The senior Brot monk was demonstrating proper shot-giving technique in a trident-tattooed arm. She and her new student were clad in grey scrubs and surgical masks, their hair pulled back into ponytails. Poseidon's tech allowed for an easy transition out of the hive mind for retiring Tonys, but these gentlemen were forcibly ejected from the hive in an instant. Quite a shock. Waking up to your own thoughts after years of sharing a hive's makes it difficult for them to pull together their own sentences. She withdrew the needle and put her left hand on the patient's right shoulder. You have to watch for syncope. They have a habit of fainting. To the former Tony, she asked, Any disassociation? Feeling as if you are not in your own body? Thinking looked painful for him. He was middle-aged, his curly red hair bald, his skin freckled uniformly across all visible skin surfaces. A pair of reading glasses rested on his nose, and an entertainment magazine was face down next to him. On the back cover was an advertisement for diamonds featuring Samantha Cyber. His name tag said that his name was Antonio. There were a handful of others who were also trying on different versions of the name Tony instead of resuming their civilian monikers. Antonio, Anthony, T-Bone. Yes, Antonio said. He blinked, opened his mouth to speak, and then closed it. Lie down, Factor advised with a gentle touch and a rearrangement of the man's pillows. It will pass. Your brain is relearning autonomy, self-control. Sleep is the only therapy. She helped him under the covers, asking, What did your mother call you, Antonio? He looked to Espie for help, as if she'd know. Factor had advised her to give him time to answer questions, no matter how awkward the silent waiting felt. 32 seconds after the question was asked, the man answered, Shawnee. She got the bug eyes in Glasgow when I was a little boy. What a nice name, Shawnee. How sweet. Factor smiled at Espie. Isn't that sweet, Espie? Espie nodded against her will. Sweet, yeah. I'll check on you tomorrow, Antonio. Sleep well. Ready to move on? Yeah, Espie nodded. To be honest, I'm a bit overwhelmed, she said as they stepped away from Sean, turned Shawnee, turned Tony, turned Antonio. You are doing great. Factor led her through the crowded auditorium towards the exit. With their hair and beards growing out, the former Tonys no longer resembled one another, but many were socializing as conditioned in triads. They share a connection deeper than we can imagine. Factor told Espie as they navigated around a former triad playing cards on the floor. Like triplets born to the same mother, they will feel not empathy, but the actual emotional and sometimes physical experience of their brothers, no matter how far apart they may be, forever. Speaking action at a distance, Espie paraphrased Einstein. Entanglement. My sci-fi Jasper and I practice a version of that trick too. He uses it to pester me while I'm at school because he wants me to come home and give him sugar cubes. They pushed through the heavy double doors into the hall. Two brats pushing lunch carts full of dirty dishes moved swiftly past them, hurrying off to their right. Factor and Espie headed off into the opposite direction. As they made their way down the hall, Factor asks, "What do your parents do?" Dad was a field doctor for evolution, and Mom was an assembly line putting wheels on desk chairs by day and a mathematician by night. Besides one conversation we had when I was little, I didn't know it was her thing. After she died, I found her notebook after notebook of equations and this tiny writing with these perfect diagrams. She talked with her hands. First one was in the drawer at the hospital she died in. Tons more in her room at the home she lived in. I wonder what she was trying to figure out, you know. I guess I've been thinking about them quite a bit since I first met you. They passed away. I have foster parents, but, well, I'm on my own now. I am sorry for your loss, Espie. Perhaps I can solve your mystery and tell you what she was figuring out in her notebooks. Really? Maybe I'll check you up on that. A moment of silence, and then Factor stopped at a pair of double doors, and they stepped inside into another massive auditorium lit by nightlights along the floor. "Shortcut," said the monk. The auditorium was empty, a perpetual plane of lights on the floor, uniformly patterned, stretching out into the darkness around them. A pair of double doors appearing as a small square of light suspended above the place where the patterned floor of lights merged with the void, were the only other objects to be seen. As they headed to the double doors on the opposite side of the room, Factor said, "I was surprised to hear from you." "I was surprised I called," Espie admitted. "I'm always preaching to Scott about how he can't punch the city into submission, so I guess I thought it was time I set an example. Did something to help Green City that didn't involve busting my knuckles." "Most excellent," Factor chuckled. The floor lights lit her as she walked over them before she faded into the shadows, then revealed her again as she approached the next light. The brat's deformity still uneased the girl. Espie wondered if she could ever get over Factor's half-skull face. They walked in silence. "I never liked the Tonys," Espie admitted after a time. "I was always creeped out by them, but I came to hate them. My boyfriend was killed by a triad right outside of his apartment building, the same one Scott and his mum lived in." Factor stopped walking. With her good side in the light, she said, "I'm sorry, Espie. What was his name?" "Ezra. He was Genesian like you. He formed a gang to fight him because Skyrat fought off one triad, and then the other one came to take their place." They began walking again. "Ezra looked up to Scott, you know. So he had some of his boys start a place in the neighborhood, wearing those stupid green bandanas and talking tough to everybody. Call himself Ezras. Dumb as that sounds. But Ezra and his buddies weren't superheroes like Scott. There were 5 of them, so they had the numbers advantage. But this Tony Triad they went after was brutal. Particularly to Ezra, because he was blue. They, Espie and Factor stopped at the double doors. "They skinned him. They literally cut his face off." Factor winced. "Oh, Espie," she said, taking her hands. Espie withdrew and began waving her hands, fanning off any pity Factor may be feeling. She wiped away the tears from her eyes and sniffed, looked at the monk and looked away. Factor said, "Ungenerous centuries ago, blue children were a sign of wealth and privilege. Blue skin wasn't natural selection. It was human selection. Embryos were coded with a gene that made them blue to show off they had been curated by their parents, designed in a hospital laboratory to be what their mothers and fathers envisioned when they pictured human perfection. The practice went out of fashion generations ago, but the gene lived on." They pushed through the double doors and into another long, brightly lit hall and turned right. On this dimension's Earth, blue-skinned Geonosians are thought of as the other, unnatural, so evolutionary inferior, unworthy of the same kindness ingested afforded Earthlings. Most blue-skinned folks in Green City, however, are natural-born citizens, 100 years separate from the immigrant Geonosians that came to help build this amazing walled island city. Yeah, well, so I've hated the Tonys, but I'm tired. I don't have the energy to hate them anymore. I feel sorry for them. They're so pitiful now. Factor said, Do you blame him, Espie? Scott? Is Skyrat? For what happened to Ezra? Espie considered the question carefully. I resent him sometimes. He goes out there night after night, doing the same stupid quad that got Ezra killed. And I wonder, how much good does he actually do, rampaging through the city, laying waste every night? Does he really make a difference? Or is he stuck in some unhealthy pattern of self-destruction instead of grieving? I mean, Ezra was his best friend, see? We brats no patterns, Factor said. So I can see your point. He's hurt and obsessed. Bad combination. I think there's an auditorium full of people who would say he did good by them, though. So would all of those Louies who survived the Left Hand's attack because Skyrat selflessly ran into a burning building. Unfortunately, Espie, there are, and I hate the word because it's subjectively human, but there are evil people in the world. So we need soldiers and healers alike. People saving his enemies, the Tonys and the Louies, gave him some closure. They stopped in front of an unmarked door. I think you like this. What's your step? The first one's a doozy. Factor unlocked and opened the door and stepped into the dark, disappearing as if the room had eaten her. Espie followed suit, and the moment she left, her foot touched the floor on the other side of the threshold. Her very being was grabbed by some unseen, all-consuming force which whisked her away at breakneck speed before bringing her to a complete, shocking halt. It was pitch black. Then there were stars all around them. Welcome to space, said Factor. Espie couldn't feel the floor beneath her anymore. Below her was more space. It disoriented her. How could there be a below if there was no above relative to it? She suddenly felt upside down. Factor, it's okay. Don't panic. Take a time to adjust, Espie. We're astral projections. You've left your physical form behind, but you still feel physical sensations, just like an amputee feels after a missing foot. They did not move, but space did. It turned 180 degrees, and the two of them were facing the planet Janus, whose continents were roughly shaped the same as the Earth Espie knew. The entire land surface of Janus, however, had been settled by their technologically advanced civilization centuries ago. The entire planet was a thriving city, the moon a satellite city. The airspace around the planet was crowded with satellites, space stations, and ships. Welcome to Janus, Espie, where it all began. When we first met, you said you wanted to learn the divine geometry. Is that still true? Espie was incredulous. My body? Your physical form is in deep, dreamless sleep on the padded floor of the room we stepped into, right next to mine. The door closed and locked behind us. Only a very trusted few know about that room, or my astral trebuchet. You're perfectly safe. Do you trust me? Espie was realizing she could control her flight. I don't trust anyone, she said, stopping to look Factor in the eye. She turned away, then forced herself to turn back. It occurred to her that she was going through the motions of breathing without inhaling or exhaling anything. Everyone I've ever loved has left to hurt me, and you just launched me from an astral trebuchet, whatever the quad that is, without my consent. And I know your psyche can handle the stress of the equation study. similar to the stress the astral trebuchet exerts. If you couldn't handle it, your astral self would have snapped right back to your body as if you were an elastic tether. Again, perfectly safe. I apologize for the unfortunately necessary ruse. Necessary? Espie repeated. Of course, Factor continued. Listen, you're a special girl, Espie. Brilliant. I see it in you. I feel it. I want to personally share the sacred knowledge with you. To be your teacher in the bright arts, the divine geometry. Espie hesitated. I don't know. There is a community for you at our temple, Espie. Support, family, when you're ready for that. But you have to trust me. The teenager admired the view of Janice, her anxiety overshadowed by her growing curiosity. I want to go, or just... Outstretching her hand for Espie, Factor asked, Will you trust me? Espie took her hand. Funny how you can be blind to something right before your eyes. On Bruce's eyes, as far as his 4x-foot close-up self-portrait was concerned. It was Lucretia who pointed it out after the unknown had recovered it from the evil East. Age had dulled the painting's once bright color palette. The canvas was scarred in the bottom left from being dragged, and someone had put a cigarette out in one of Bruce's nostrils, leaving a singed hole. I had hung the portrait of my old friend above my desk in my cramped home office, where Scott and I were admiring it now, listening to a late-period Scarabs album. The office was dusty and cluttered, but tidy and staged. There were no windows, and the only light was the one illuminating Bruce's fringed 6x5 with fractal pattern, occupying the entirety of the room's open space, tucked under bookshelves in some spots, and popping out from underneath in others. All of the wall space at the floor was occupied by bookshelves, except for the corner where the heating vent lived, and where I had a reading chair and a small table with a lamp. Do you see it? I asked him. The hidden detail. Well, the boy looked at me, back to the painting of Bruce, back to me. I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to be looking for, Mr. Bird. I smiled at him. In my home, you may call me Wayne, son. You should know there's something hiding in the reflection bouncing off those wraparound sunglasses, I said, pointing with my cane. Leaning in, he gasped in realization. Holy quad! Is that you? It is, I coughed. Not as Bruce knew me on our Earth all those years ago, but as I am now, an old man sharing your Earth, a different timeline, nearly 200 years later. A cold chill shook me. I often wonder if this detail was also in the painting by my Earth's Bruce. Realization was like lightning to a kite, and Scott said, You're wearing the same sweater vest. Pretty close, I agreed. I have one of Bruce's other paintings, too, I said. I flipped a light switch on the wall by the door, then pointed with my cane at the wall opposite the self-portrait. That was of my very modest friend, Dorothy. Scott became embarrassed at the sight of Bruce's masterpiece. He put his hands in his hoodie pocket, smiled and blushed, and looked around the room. Above the bookshelves, the walls were hung with more framed art, photos of friends and families, and posters for Strongman Returns and Meat Curtains Film with the Third Eye Sees. Models and toys lived in front of books on some of the shelves, and a abused red and blue Gibson Les Paul leaned into the bookshelf next to where the turntable lived. I had Scott listening to the Scarabs with volume likely a few decibels too high for my wife's tastes. The music playing through the haunted speakers hung in the upper corners of the room. Previously, I had been trying to convince Scott that the Scarabs were the best rock band in the multiverse ever. Back to the nude portrait of Bruce's lover as a goddess, Scott said. She was really pretty. You wouldn't believe what I've been through to keep that painting safe over the years. Notice the bullet hole in the bottom left corner. I motioned toward the reading chair. Please, Sit, I said, pulling the desk chair out for myself. The scarabs were singing a song about love being your only necessity. I said, I once believed in what this song says with all my naive little heart. I no longer share that youthful sentiment. Oxygen, water, food, shelter, occupation, maybe then love. Still a great quaffing song, though. Can't beat that horn section or the chorus. Scott picked up the only book on the table by my reading chair, an ancient, oversized mass-market tome about vampires. The publication dates were different, of course, but the book was otherwise the same as the one I had owned when I was about Scott's age. The years had yellowed its pages and frayed its edges, but it had once been a sleek production chronicling the history of vampires in various cultures, with an exhaustive section on vampires in cinema. I was pleasantly shocked when he showed me a black-and-white photo of Count Orlok in the book and said, I love Nosferatu. Really? I coughed. Surprise, surprise. Settling back into the chair, slowly turning to the next page, he said, It's Dracula without names. Nosferatu, I mean. Bram Stoker's widow wouldn't greenlight a movie adaptation, but the director, this German guy, he changed all the names in the script and made the movie anyway. I knew the story because it was in the book. Diabolical. Yeah, Mrs. Stokes sued him, right? And she won. But it was too late. By the time the judge ordered all the prints to be destroyed, they'd already been shipped to theaters. It was a masterpiece. So some of the theaters couldn't bring themselves to destroy their copies, and the movie lived on, even after being killed, like a vampire. He turned the page again, then showed me another photo, an iconic shot of the famous silent film vampire rising from his coffin at an impossible angle. This part where he's in the hold of the ship, that's my favourite. Mine too. I loved this kid. How are you feeling, son? He closed the book and returned it to the table, then cast his gaze at a model Bronze Age boat encased in glass on the shelf above the record player. Its plaque said, Argo. He wondered how many oars there were. They were so tiny. 60? 80 maybe? The Scarabs were playing a heavy rock tune with nonsense lyrics and a killer chorus, imploring us to gather ourselves. I could hear Lucretia messing about in the kitchen. The burns all healed before I woke up. He looked at the top of his hands and his palms. My powers are back, whatever that means. Sounds like good news to me. I still don't remember anything from the fire. My friend said I split into multiple versions of myself. Half ran into one building, half into the other. He leaned forward onto his knees with an intense desperation in his eyes, saying, And not all of them survived. Not all of me came back to be me again. Are you again? Or do you feel as if you're... I looked him in the eye. Missing something. He shrugged. Only memories, I guess. I don't know. The Scarabs were trading guitar and piano licks. Give the memories time, I said with a gentle quiet. I can only imagine your brain is still processing the information from all those disparate sources, building a cohesive narrative. There's a puzzle dwelling in your skull, and you'll have to piece it together over time. With help. As if on cue, Lucretia entered the room with a silver serving tray between her hands. On it were 3 steaming cups of tea on saucers. That music is so loud. I can hear myself think in the kitchen. Are you two enjoying yourselves? Even more so now, my love. I smiled at her, taking my tea from the tray. Turn down the volume, will you, son? Scott did as I asked. Lucretia served him, then placed the tray on top of the bookshelf by the door, just above her head, before taking her own teacup into hand. The action caused a litter of dust bunnies to slow dance off the top of the bookshelf, prompting her to wince and give me a side-eyed look that asked when I'd last dusted my office. She leaned against the doorframe next to me, her right hand holding a teacup across her belly, smiling a sly smile at me for a reason I couldn't determine. "You are gorgeous," I told her. "My muse." Even in her 80s, she was gifted with a youthful appearance relative to her time spent circling the sun. In response to my compliment, she gave me a disapproving look, so I course-corrected. "You're also brilliant. A journalist so sharp I'm lucky I haven't cut myself on you." "I love you." She waved me off with a smile and took a sip of her tea. "But Scott doesn't want to picture that, I'm sure." He was admiring the boat again, sipping his own tea, ignoring my moment with Lucretia. I leaned in towards him. "That's the Argo, the ship Theseus went adventuring in." "Oh, yeah? You know Theseus, right? The Minotaur guy?" "Good, sure. You like mythology?" He shrugged. "Berserker mentioned it once." "Berserker?" "That's okay. Philosophy?" Lucretia groaned. "Goddess help you, Scott." She went off on her own adventure down the hall. "I was just wondering how many oars there are, is all," Scott told me. "My lovely wife's too grounded for this sort of thing, but there's an interesting story that sails with that old boat." I turned toward my desk, opened my cookie tin, and started to pack my pipe. "So Theseus was the seafaring hero who sailed the Argo there into many legendary adventures, lots of battles. After he retired from hero work, he donated his ship to a museum so they could preserve it as a monument to his triumphs. Those Greek heroes were the real modest types, right?" Scott scratched his recently buzzed head. "What's Greek mean?" "Stay with me." I took a long draw from my pipe, activating the heating element within, sat back and exhaled into the air. Turning back to my student, I continued. "As the ship sat in the museum over the years, it began to need work. Planks were rotting and had to be replaced. The mast got infested with termites. Eventually, after many, many years, the whole boat had been replaced, little by little, like your body replacing cells." I took a smaller hit and then put the pipe back on the desk behind me. We could hear the toilet flush. A new song was beginning. This was a bouncy number. "The question becomes, if all of the repairs over the years replaced every last scrap of wood and sail and metal from the original ship, is the boat at the museum still the ship of Theseus?" Scott was perplexed. Lucretia returned to the doorway. He looked at her, then back at me, smiling. He said, "Really, who gives a quat, Wayne?" Lucretia and I both laughed. "I think I may prefer Mr. Bird after all," I quipped. "Pointless navel-gazing, I say," Lucretia said. "No one has time for that kind of bull-quat. The dishes need to be done, and the grocery list needs to be written." After enjoying the evening's visit for another 20 minutes or so, I packed another pipe and walked the boy to our front door to say goodnight. On my stoop, as he put on his shoes, I looked over our yard, considering our digital mushroom problem. The fungi had a dull neon pink glow and were beginning to climb the corner of the northwest side of the house, programming the wood to grow more mushrooms. "Mr. Bird," Scott said, "what Geronimo did, setting those buildings on fire, trapping all those people inside, shooting those first responders, that won't be forgiven. Louie Louie will want revenge." I stood up straight. Geronimo. He violated our treaty. In my mind's eye, I saw John, the little boy, squealing, laughing hysterically into the golden field near our farm. It was a bold attack, and not just on Louie's. Word is coming down from my people in city government. Minister Prime is discussing military retaliation. Scott pulled his mask down over his head, tied it off under his chin, and put his hood up. His hands went into his maroon hoodie pockets. "Do you think I'm going to have to fight the left hand?" "It feels inevitable, doesn't it?" I took a long draw from my pipe. Exhaling, I said, "Hey, my man, Don't dwell on it. That's for the future. And when the time comes, I'll be your Plutarch. I never wrote down the Skyrat stories from my youth. But instead, I'll write your true story. Isn't life weird? Sure is, Mr. Bird, he said. I'm proud of you, my boy, I told him. Thanks, Mr. Bird. But the final draft of your personal narrative is still due next week. Right, he said, wearing the mask of a panicked student. Still seeing Samantha Cyber Friday night? He turned as red as his hoodie. She told me to wear my best mask. Kinky, I said. He did that awkward look around for the help that he does. Help came in the form of Lucretia, joining me on our stoop, saying, Tell your mom to call me Scott. I will, he said. Good night, Mrs. Bird, Mr. Bird. Good night, Scott, smiled Lucretia. In my ear, she whispered, Did you ask him if he took that 20 off the counter? At first I played an old man and pretended not to hear. Finally I said, Some other time. She patted my butt and went back inside. Then Skyrat, the superhero I invented a century before I had him in my classroom, walked off with his hands in his pockets, singing a For Algernon tune to himself. I recognized it as a cover of an old Daniel Dooley song, written after Meat Curtain broke up. Oh, to live and breathe with death our dream, Skyrat crooned to himself. Oh, to live and breathe with death our dream, I quietly sang back to him. I took a long draw from my pipe. Orion, one of the few constellations visible under the glow of Green City's collective output of light, hunted above me. Deep inside I became determined to draw a conclusion to the mother of all my questions. Did some unseen intelligence bring Scott and I together with a purpose? My mind swirled, expanded, illuminated the folds and wrinkles inside my old brain. I explored time and space in the vehicle of my imagination. Parallel realities, infinite multiverses in orbit around one another. The weirdness of my long, strange life, Skyrat's very existence, self-repeating fractal patterns. The consciousness of fundamental particles, the power of plastic statistical probabilities. Oh, I'm too fucking high for this shit, I sighed. Then I went back to the business of enjoying the mystery. Showing enough to